Our focus has been on Zimbabwe and talking about the passing on of the former president Robert Mugabe. Let's focus on the investment climate in that country, especially with the current economic situation where there's hyperinflation, high food and fuel prices. And how will the country move forward if it cannot induce consumer confidence and attract foreign direct investment? With me is Janina Slawski, who is Principal Investment Consultant at Alexander Forbes. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I've just learned that you grew up in Zimbabwe. Perhaps you can tell me about your fond memories of growing up there.
Fond memories, beautiful country, not very good economic policy, which I think is one of the things that we've got to learn and find ways to not get something so wrong in South Africa.
All right, please elaborate on that, because, you know, there needs to be a two-sided view. There are other people who would say that, what do you mean, not good policy?
I think prescription is a very good example, or the potential for prescribed assets, a good example of bad policy. We all know what we're trying to achieve. In South Africa, we're trying to get more growth and specifically more jobs, because that will solve a lot of our problems. We can repay our debts, there will be less crime, there will be less reason for people to be going out and attacking other people. So that's where we should be focusing, and it's the antithesis of prescription. Prescription is everything that's bad in terms of an investment sense, because it actually takes the hard-earned money that people have put into their retirement funds and actually potentially gives them poor returns. And that's not what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve great returns, great economic growth, great job creation. That's where we would want everyone to focus.
Okay, so this policy has failed before, and what's wrong with trying or giving it another try in terms of using it for the good reasons? If you are having state-owned enterprises which are struggling, and you say that for one to get a private sector to invest in an SOE is much the same as getting any funder to invest so that they can turn it around and make it profitable again.
The problem is it's not a lack of capital. If you could have great investment opportunities, developmental assets that would lead to the building of factories, creation of jobs, infrastructure, etc., assets would naturally flow from South African investors, but also from international investors. That is a win-win-win situation, because you're getting everything flowing into the right space. The negative is actually to say there's this group of assets, let's just take some of it and put it to poor use. Because if the investments were great, you wouldn't have to force those assets into them. The assets would flow. That's the principle, that prescription implies that you're forcing someone to take something that they obviously don't want. And obviously whoever's wanting the money can say, well, I don't have to have good governance, and I can actually pay lower returns because these people are forced to invest into me. Whereas if you've got great investments, then there will be a requirement that you've got good governance and good returns and good yields, but the investors will be very happy to come into them. So you have two ways you're trying to create jobs and growth and so on. One will lead to bad outcomes, and we've seen it before in South Africa where we previously had prescription. And the other was positive and will lead to the growth in jobs. That's where we want the conversation to be.
So if something has failed before, isn't there a way to get around it? Because if the private sector is saying that they cannot take privately held funds to help in turning the country's economy around, then who should do it? Because it's like the whole country watching the whole country's economic fiber plummeting.
Well, I think let's look at who would end up paying for prescription. As I said, if you take retirement fund members' money, then essentially it's the people like you and me, hard won, we've put our money aside, we're trying to save for our retirement. Why should we take people from there and not necessarily invest in the best way for them? Versus, we all know that we're likely to have more and more government debts because of the SOE issues. Who's going to pay for that? The slightly richer people who pay taxes, for example, rather than the poorer people whose only saving is in their retirement fund. And then all the way into the good sector is where we've got beautiful opportunities that international investors would be interested in putting their money into, provided they know that they're coming into a safe environment where there's good economic policy. You take, for example, moving into green energy, climate change, etc. There's a concept of just transition that says you have to build new cities, create jobs for people around renewable energy, because you can't just shut down where they currently are. You get those investments working well, international investors will come here to get carbon credits. They will be queuing to get into these investments. That's a positive scenario. But as soon as you start having anything that says, let's introduce something as bad as prescription, international investors will say, I'm not interested. I'll go look in South America and Asia for similar investment opportunities, same return, same risk, but good economic policies. You're frightening away the opportunity to get it right.
So your parting shot is in a no-go area in terms of investment?
Look, Zimbabwe's made a lot of mistakes over the years. So one of the things I would ask would be South Africa, learn from the mistakes. Do good in the economic policy that creates jobs and security that's attractive to international investors. Don't make mistakes that take us back in this country to the 1950s when we last had prescription and we all learned that it was a bad thing to do.
All right. Thank you very much for making time to speak to us.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Janina Slawski is Principal Investment Consultant at Alexander Forbes. Let's take a break.